Alright, so let's get this project started. So as I mentioned before, we're using SDL2. Now, to set up SDL2, it's an extra library that you need to include into your project. Depending what you use, you might want to use LazyFoo's setup guide for that. So he's got a Hello World section where he talks about setting up for Windows, Linux, and Mac, and various different IDEs, so code blocks, Visual Studio, etc. Or you can check out Will Usher's SDL2 tutorial index for another setup and a few basic tutorials that just talk about some very starting concepts. This is the one that I started on for SDL2. But because I want to get you into coding as quickly as possible, we're going to jump into those folders I got you to download. So I'll get you to download it now. So the zip files, assets.zip, SDL2.zip, and startingcode.zip. Just expand those, unzip those into folders. And we're going to go into SDL2. I'm going to copy that folder and we're going to put it somewhere that we're just always going to reference easy. That way we can move project from computer to computer to computer. So I'm just going to copy that folder. Now this thing includes all the SDL, includes code that some other people have written, and the libraries to include for both 32-bit and 64-bit. So I want to copy this folder into just C drive. I just chuck it in here just to make my life easier. So I'm just in C drive, just paste SDL2 here with inside that folder is just the include lib and SDL2.dll, which we don't really need to be there. Cool, alright, that's the first part done. We've got somewhere that we can reference these files from. Now, I use Visual Studio 2013 Community. I don't think it's too different from the new one. I think they've only added new things to it. Anyway, if you have issues, just contact me. So, we're going to make a new project, make sure it's a Visual C++ project. Click Empty Project and give it whatever name you like. Let's call this Cyborg Battle. That'll do. Keep note of where it's gonna go, because we're gonna have to add stuff into that folder. Okay, build that. That builds you an empty project. Now, this is the annoying part. We've got to link all this stuff up. So we got to tell this project how to link to the include and lib stuff in that folder that we pasted into C drive. So how do we do that? You see over here, not the outside whole project, but the little inside solution inside here with the ++ or probably a different symbol depending on what version you got. Right click that, go down to properties, and we're going to set up a few things. Now make sure your configuration is set for all configurations. And I want you to go down to C++, General. Our first step is to add additional include directories. So click down this little down arrow, edit. Click this thing here, new line, ... lets us browse. So I'm just going to go find. Now this is the additional include directories. So we go computer, local disk, so C drive, SDL2. This is your include part. So select that, do select folder. Cool, that's that part done. Now that helps us reference all the code, all the header files I've got there. Now the linking part, so go into linker, general. Where is it? Yes, there it is. Additional library directories. It's about halfway down, I suppose. Half? Yeah, about half. Additional library directories. Click that, do the same thing, edit, do the new line button up there. Yep, browse. Now, find that SDL2 folder again, go into lib. Now you have the choice of picking between, do you want to make a 32-bit game or a 64-bit game? I tend to stick to 32-bit because I sort of, well, 32-bit things run on 64-bit things, so I just want to cover all my bases usually. So I'll pick x86, which lets us do 32-bit systems. Okay, good. Now this part, in your linker section, go down to input, and this is where we tell it what type of, what libraries we need to include. So you see additional dependencies here, click that down arrow and edit again. And this one we type out. I'm just gonna get a reference, hold on. Hold on. Alright, so we need SDL2.lib, SDL2 main.lib, SDL2 image.lib, SDL2 mixer.lib, SDL2 ttf.lib. So to do basic SDL2 stuff, that's to do with like rendering to a screen, taking input. You need this one. This one does the SDL2 main.lib. That's to do with the Windows stuff, I believe. Including image lets us do, well, we can load PNGs and stuff. By default, it's just BMP. So this lets us do better image related stuff. Mixer is all sound and music, and TTF is text to font, so we can load up text to font files, or font files basically, and render them to textures, which I'll talk about much later. Okay, cool. Got that now. Next thing, system. This subsystem part. Now I want you to hit apply. So far, so good. And I want you to change it to debug. Now, the difference between debug and release is obviously debug. You can debug your code, you can stop it, look at variables, test things. And if you're lazy like me, you'd like to see a little console window output stuff as we go along, especially little errors. So if we want the game window and a console window to pop up, then we're going to choose this. So choose console for debug. You'll see when we get this thing going that basically when we run the game in debug mode, we get the game window and a little black window which has all the, console output. Hit apply, go to release, and instead choose Windows. Hit apply. So when we do the release version, it doesn't pop up with that little console window, which is probably what you want for when you actually release this game. Cool, okay. So we have, it's all linked up now. So we just need code and I guess a few assets to run this thing. So let's move on to that. Now there's a bunch of code that I want to start you off. I will explain what's included after we get this thing running, but I don't want you to write everything from scratch for this course. It's a bunch of files I've included: cleanup, drawing functions, random number, and respath, which just helps speed everything up. I've written these once and then I just use them all the time now. So I need to find, oh, this is in my starting code folder, by the way. Starting code, copy all this. Okay, we gotta find this stuff now. Now remember when I told you to take note of where hang on, Visual Studio, what the hell is it? Okay, take again. Alright, do you remember when I told you guys to remember where your project is? Well, that's what we're going to do now. We're going to find that fault. There it is, Cyborg Battle. Cool. Yep. And go into it again. This is where all your code gets dumped. Yep. So you dump all your code inside of wherever your project is, basically, but there's a folder with the exact same name as the project inside itself. So Cyborg Battle, dump all your code here. And I'm just going to drag it into my project here so it knows about it. So just under source files for now, and see all these header files? I prefer to put them under the header file filter. It's not a real folder, it's just a filter. So it's just in the project thing, it knows that, hey, these things under these filter are sort of, I don't know, we've grouped them under the header file section. And I prefer to split it that way. You can just have them all in the source files filter, it doesn't matter. But this at least makes it nicer. Anyway, we've got a few things included now. Good. Again, if you're having troubles, let me know. Alright, I'm going to explain those extra files later. What I'm going to do is make a new item under source files, C++ file, make sure it's a .cpp, and I'm just going to call it main. Oh, I think I'll just go at 100%. Okay, cool. Okay, let's start typing some code. I finally got there. Include. I just want to include all these header files that I've pretty much dumped into the project. Respath comes in handy. Include drawing functions. A lot of these drawing functions are sourced from that Will Usher tutorial that I mentioned, but I've also added a bunch of extra ones myself to make life easier for certain situations. And I'm just going to check SDL mixer here as well. Drawing functions includes SDL, the SDL header and the SDL image header, so that's why I haven't had to explicitly write that here, but mixer hasn't been included in anything yet, so I'm just going to include it now so I can set up that side of things. I'll explain that as we get there. Now if you're on Windows, you have to, well, I think this is the same for Mac and Linux too. SDL has this thing where it tries to match this main function exactly to replace it with SDL main. So make sure you at least match these arguments at the top here. Otherwise you'll get SDL main missing something. I don't know, I can't remember the error exactly, but it'll complain about SDL main being missing in some way. So make sure that this is what it needs to look for to replace this with SDL main. It's weird, I don't know. Anyway. Okay, so we've got to initialize SDL. Now, if SDL init SDL, I'm just going to give it one of their existing static flag references that they've made. So everything, SDL init everything, just do it all. Now, if that's not 0, so it returns 0 if it's successful. So if it's not successful, error initializing SDL. Return 1, so quit basically. So this is set up SDL. Get out of the way, mouse. Alright. Next part, the window. So the thing that pops up so we can draw stuff in it. Set up window. That's next. SDL window. Window. Is equal to SDL create window. We're going to come back and change this stuff later, but the title that you want on there, so I'm going to just put Cyborg Battle. The X and Y of where it pops up. Now, I'm going to use another one of these pre-built static flags. Window pause centered. So I'll do that again for the Y, X and Y of my screen. It's going to be that. Which basically means whatever size window that I'm going to make, center it on my actual screen when it pops up. Now, how big is this thing going to be? 640 pixels by 352 pixels. That's how big the screen's going to be. And SDL window shown. I'm just going to make this over 2 lines so I can type this next bit. Now, if you wanted to make this thing start in full screen mode, you would replace that with this little, I can't remember the name of this thing, but basically lets us sort of add a few bits together. SDL window full screen. So say, okay, the window is shown and start in full screen. Just replace that with this, including this vertical line. That's if you hold shift and press that slash button over enter, that's how you build that thing. I don't want mine in full screen though, so it's okay. So if window is equal to null pointer, that means it did not work for whatever reason. So we're gonna quit SDL, let it shut down properly, that part, whatever it's initialized. Output window error. This is just for our own debugging benefit. Return 1. Cool. So if it didn't crash at this point, we keep going on to the next thing, which is going to be the renderer. Set up renderer. So this thing helps us draw stuff to the screen. It's very helpful. Render is equal to SDL. Create renderer. You tell it which window you want to reference. index, the index of the rendering driver to initialize, -1 to initialize the first one supporting the requested flag. So we're making our first renderer, so we put -1 in here as it says to do, and then some flags. So what things we want. I haven't played around with these really, but this seems to be the standard to get you good results. So, whoops, accelerated and prevent VSync. Vertical sync, if you know about that stuff, that's good. It's usually, I don't know, we're preventing it. Usually it's annoying. But you can look into that yourself. But anyway, these give good results. I just stick that in all the time. It seems to be alright. If you want to get into more details, look up renderer flags and you'll find all the other options that you can chuck in there too. So if our renderer is also a null pointer, it means it didn't work. So quit. Actually, we should probably kill the window properly first, so clean up. Window, that's from my cleanup header file, just to make things easier. CR, renderer error. Return 1. Getting there. So what I'm making is a little pixely game. So you can do this thing where you set logical size, which means regardless of how big the screen size is, it's going to try logically fit a particular screen size to that size. So if you want everything to be like always 2 times pixels, then you can set the screen size to double whatever this next thing is. I'll show you what I mean. Render set logical size. Renderer 640 by 352. I'm just putting in the same numbers as above. Yeah, which basically means this is the size to draw things at before we scale it to the screen size dimensions mentioned in create window. So if you want it to be all 2 times pixels, everything scaled by 2 times pixels, just put in half the numbers here, half of whatever's up here. So half of whatever's up there, put it in here and it will do that for you. You don't have to think about doing weird zoom stuff. You can just set that. It's really nice and easy. Alright, we got to initialize the other things. So, we got to initialize SDL image as well. So if, which lets us use PNGs basically, which is what I want, because bitmaps, as you know, pretty old school. PNGs are also usually a lot smaller in size, so it'll drastically cut your size of your whole project down a fair bit when you're giving it out to people. Not equal to. So if it didn't work, quit again. Don't know why they've done it in that particular way, but that's fine. I'm just following standards here that other people have set up. And we want to set up that text to font. That's for later. It's a lot easier, so I guess I'll type in these comments here. Hold on. Initialize text to font. Basically lets us output strings using fonts onto the screen. SDL TTF did not initialize. What's with the capital E? Go away. Alright. Term 1. Okay, the mixer next. The mixer lets us play with sound and music, which is always good. Mix, open audio. Now you gotta choose the frequency at which this thing comes out. I'm not a sound guy, so I just more or less again copy this from someone else. So we enter in the frequency, the format, how many channels it has, and the chunk size. The chunk size is sort of what do you call it? In this, well, Mixer calls chunks basically whatever sound you load in. So I guess it tries to stream in chunks of sound, and this decides how much it can take in at any one time. Anyway, again, I just follow this because I'm not a soundy guy. If you're very into the sound stuff, then you can definitely check out these settings. Two channels. If you want more channels, basically how many different sounds can play at once. Two's fine for me. You might want more. If it's equal to -1, this one outputs a -1. Well, returns a -1 if there's an error. So it's just different. It's different to the above ones. See out. Did not initialize. Good. All right, we've made everything start up. That's always a good start. Cool. Let's actually do something with all this. So this is, we've pasted the folder with all the stuff we need to link to. We've told our project how to link to it. In our code now, we've told it to start all of those things, and now we're actually going to start using it. So we're going to load up a texture to draw. String res path. Res is basically just going to be a folder where we just source all our assets from. And get resource path. This this respath.h, this is from the Will Usher tutorial. It just makes dealing with finding your assets a lot easier when you're playing with Visual Studio. So I didn't write this thing, but it helps us find our folder. It'll just give back our folder directory where all our assets are, and then we can just find them. So we're going to make our first SDL texture, which is basically just an image that we want to display. Load texture, res path, plus, and I'm just going to load this one, map.png, and you give it the renderer so it knows how to build it. So using the renderer and an image file, this function goes off and builds this texture for you. Okay, I'm just going to set up a little loop. Run game for 5,000 ticks, which is, I think, basically, I think it's equivalent to milliseconds, or pretty close to anyway. Wow. So get ticks counts the ticks from the start of when you run your game. So it starts at 0 and ticks up. This will help us deal with time. So while this thing is less than 5,000, so how many ticks has it done since we started our game? If it's less than 5,000, then I want to SDL render clear, and we give it the renderer. Now that we're just going to go over a very basic drawing procedure, which is clear the screen, draw what we want to the screen next. You can do heaps of these. So render texture, the texture that I want to render, the renderer, and I'm not using this one, I'm using this one X and Y. I'm just going to leave the clip as default. So where do I want to draw it on the screen? 0, 0, oh, 0, 0. So that's its X and Y, 0, 0. Now X and Y is 0, 0 is top left. So I'm drawing from the top left of the screen, however big this texture is. Now drawing to the screen, well, this draws to the renderer, it doesn't draw directly to the screen. So this renderer sort of stores up this big image, and then when we want to show it, show image with been rendering. Then we do SDL render present. Cool. Alright. So this thing runs for 5,000 ticks. Every time it runs through, clears the screen, draws our texture to the renderer, and then gets the renderer to dump out whatever it's storing in this image to the screen. Now, just to sign everything off, we're going to do clean up window. I probably have to clean up that renderer as well, I'm pretty sure. Oh, help if I could spell. Renderer. And I want to, oh, I better clean up that texture too. Clean up. And STL quit. And return 0. So we made it. Okay, so clean up. What's that doing? I mentioned that you would need to know about pointers and dynamic memory before you get onto this stuff. But basically, see with SDL texture up here, this is a pointer. So it's load texture dynamically builds a texture. And all cleanup is doing is going and deleting that dynamically allocated memory for us, which is good. That way we don't take up unnecessary space in our heap or RAM or whatever you want to call it. Cool. All right. Let's try building this thing. Build solution. Help if I could see the output here. Good. Build 1 succeeded. Now I didn't want to run it because it's going to be looking for some things. and it will just crash. I'll show you, it'll just crash. Yeah, there we go. SDL2.dll is missing, so it just crashes. Now, you've got your project folder. Go back to the base of it. So in your projects, wherever you cyborg battle, you built it once and it builds this thing called a debug folder. If you're building release, it'll build a release folder. In here, this is where I'm going to chuck my asset so it can find it. So we'll go back to, hold on, let me just find all this stuff again. Where did I put it? Great, I'm going to lose everything. Hold on. Didn't I just chuck it here somewhere? Yeah. Alright, that assets.zip, that's what we want. All of this stuff. I don't want you to copy the assets folder, just what's inside it. So inside res, we got a bunch of images that I've provided, a blank white one, cyborg running around, various art things that we need, plus sounds and files and whatever else, font. Cool. But also in here is a bunch of DLLs. Now we need this so our exe will run. See, there's that SDL2.dll that it was complaining that it couldn't find. Copy all of that. Go to your project folder. In that first debug folder, now it'll build two debug folders. I'll build this one in here where it's got all these object files and stuff. Not that one. Go back to the root of your project and use the outside debug one. Chuck it in here. It's where your exe gets built. So chuck it in there. Yep. And let's run it again. Run. Yeah, that's it. Look, it loaded that image. That's pretty cool. Alright, and it ran for 5,000 ticks or milliseconds, which is basically just 5 seconds. Let's do it again. Oh yeah. Cool. Well done. We got something running. That's good. Alright, now we've gotten this far. I am going to make sure that you get a copy of this project so far. So every time we do get through a chunk of code and we can run it, then I'll basically make sure that that section of code and project, all of it, is available. If it's not, then hunt me down. Alright, cool.